Now that we've established our Google Classroom, it's time to add some people in it. So in this segment, I'm going to be talking about how to add teachers, students, and we're going to talk about parent guardian email summaries. Now it's important to note that Google Classroom is a protected domain, and so that means that only people with our ECSD username, credentials, and passwords can actually get to our Google Classrooms. And so what that means is that teachers and students can be invited into a Google Classroom, parents cannot be. Parents are going to be able to receive an email summary of activity, but they're not actually going to be able to get into the Google Classroom. We acknowledge that parents, of course, will be a support on the side of their student, looking right along with their child as to what they're doing in the Google Classroom. So we're going to show you those different roles. So what I invite you to do is to go to your Google Classroom that you just created, and we're going to click on the People tab. Once I get to my Google Classroom, I'm going to click on People. The first thing we're going to talk about is teachers. I can have up to 20 co-teachers in one Google Classroom. It's important to note that co-teachers can do everything that the Google Classroom owner can do, with the exception of deleting the classroom. Who might we want invited into our Google Classrooms? We can have our administrators, our learning coaches, our tech coaches. Perhaps you could have an educational assistant or a student teacher. When you're inviting the co-teacher, you simply hit the plus button and you're going to start to type the email address of the co-teacher that you would like invited to your classroom. And I'll invite. They'll now have the Google Classroom waiting for them to join when they go to classroom.google.com. You can see I have some examples of that here where I have some teachers who have invited me to be co-teachers to their classrooms. I would simply hit accept, and now I am sharing that classroom with them. One pro tip you can consider is actually creating a master Google Classroom that only co-teachers are part of. You never add any students to them. Then that way you have a place where you're building all of your different assignments and materials, and you're going to make copies of that classroom to use with your students. We'll be covering copying a Google Classroom in another episode. But let's go ahead and talk about, now that we've got our teachers inside the Google Classroom, how do we get our students inside the Google Classroom? There are three ways to be able to have a student get inside your Google Classroom. Again, what's crucial to understand is that students must be logged into the Chrome browser and they must navigate to classroom.google.com. What I can share with my students is I can go ahead and look for this class code, and I would be giving them this class code in order for them to be able to type that in and join the classroom. Google Classroom codes are always lowercase letters or numbers. The student would make sure that they are logged into the Chrome browser. They're going to go to classroom.google.com and they're going to be clicking the plus button, and that's going to allow them to join. They would type the code and they would hit enter and they would join. Now they're going to be a student inside of the classroom. So whenever the student goes back to Google Classroom, they will now see any of the classes that they have joined or been invited to. Another way to invite students is to go to the People tab, and you can hit invite students, hit the plus with the person, and you can actually type the name or email address. Now, if you happen to have a list of all of your student emails, you could go ahead and just paste that entire list here. But of course, I could go ahead and start typing my student names and invite. What will happen is when the student goes to classroom.google.com, they will now simply see an invitation. They'll see the classroom and a button to click join. This is sometimes helpful for our younger learners. Finally, the last way to be able to get students to join is when I click invite students. Something that's brand new this year is there's an invite link. I can copy that link and I could share that link via email to all of my students so that when they click the link, they are now joined inside of that classroom. So now that I have my teachers, I have my students, let's go ahead and talk about guardians. When you see invite guardians inside the Google Classroom, that does not mean you are inviting parents inside your Google Classroom. You are simply allowing them to get an email summary of upcoming work, missing work, and announcements in your classroom. In order to see what one of those summaries looks like, you can click the settings gear, scroll down, and you're going to see Guardian Summaries and see example. What your parents will get is missing work, upcoming work, and class activity, and it's only an email. They're not actually in your Google Classroom. So I'm going to go ahead, and what we can do is we can add the email addresses to invite those guardians to receive those summaries. Now, one thing you might notice is you might say, okay, I put some students in and they already have an email address beside them. As soon as one teacher enters the email addresses associated to that student, it will follow that student from Google Classroom to Google Classroom. When you're ready to invite guardians, you simply click Invite Guardians and you type the email address that was shared. It can be any email address, it does not have to be Gmail, and you can have multiple email addresses for one child, especially in cases of a co-parenting situation. We do have a complete guide explaining how parents can use Google Classroom that we will make available on our emerging technology page, and you can access that and share it with your families. So that's how we add people to our Google Classroom. Now we can start putting in some content. We'll see you in the next episode.